Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome again to Mindset Shift. Thank you for joining us today. Our goal is still the same, to make sure that we start thought-provoking conversations so that you are transformed, I am transformed, and we're able to positively contribute towards our society. As we are nearing the end of our season, we've been having amazing conversations. And to continue these particular conversations, we continuously ask that we interact with you so that we're able to get a foundation or a level in which we're able to communicate and talk about topics that will help you and that will also help us in terms of what to talk about. So, for the past couple of episodes, we've been talking about the fundamental principle, the equation of success, where we've spoken of how success has been essential, but we want to take it a step further to talk about impact. We spoke of how, in that particular equation, we've got the effort that an individual is supposed to put in. We also have the resources that they're supposed to put in. But we've seen for countless number of years that within our social structures, within financial instruments, within schools, wherever you go really, there's an emphasis in terms of the effort an individual is supposed to put and also the resources in which an individual is supposed to place for their things to move forward and for them to be successful. But we also speak of how an individual ought to have impact. And for the individual to have impact, we introduced two more variables where we spoke of relationships and we also spoke of understanding seasons, understanding times. And we spoke of how these things are very essential. These variables are very essential in terms of reaching out to our ultimate goal, which should be impact. In our last and previous episode, we spoke of relationships and we also spoke of how men rise and how men fall. And we spoke of the structure of relationships and how the order of relationship is important. The understanding of relationships is also important. But we also said how relationships are equally important and they work hand to hand with seasons and with times. And we spoke of how when you understand relationships and you also understand seasons, the intertwining of these particular two variables makes you understand as to how you can then contribute towards impact. So though these two variables work hand in hand, it's essential for us to have a deeper understanding on them separately. So we have spoken of relationships, and today we're going to be speaking of understanding times and understanding seasons, and how understanding the times and how understanding the season contributes towards the impact we want to have. What is it that we have to do in terms of understanding times? What is it that we have to do in terms of understanding seasons? How does that contribute in terms of relationships? How do the relationship contribute in terms of the times and seasons? And how eventually do you introduce that to your success equation so that you're able to get success, but success that moves over for a longer period and impacts more people to get into impact? So today we're going to be talking on the understanding of times and understanding of seasons. So when we speak of understanding times and understanding seasons, there are three keywords that we want to look at under that. We want to look at understanding, we want to look at time, and we also want to look at season. What then does it mean for us to then say we understand times and we also understand season? So we will begin with time, the paradox called time. For so many years, for centuries, it has been very difficult for individuals, from scientists to socialists to any individual really in society, to truly define what time is. But what they've managed to do is they've managed to set a standard that is able to give time substance so that we are able to then measure time. And by measuring time, we eventually have a simple understanding of what time is. And we know from the systems and the structures that were there before time that time itself was defined or was given the substance, which is allowing it to be measured by numerals, where we are able to then bring it down to seconds, we're able to bring it down to days, we're able to bring it down to months, and to bring it down to years. So we have had a standard that we are now able to then measure time. And a day has been divided into particular quarters that then make 24 hours. And through that, we have a basic standard in which we're able to put a comparison with time and have a simple understanding of what then time is. But time alone is not a simple thing to understand, because time does something that is very essential in terms of the life of an individual. When an individual understands time, the individual automatically understands what to do, because when you know the time, then you also know what to do. So when you're doing the wrong thing, the true question is you do not know the right time, or you do not know what time it is. A simple example, when an individual is about to sleep, one of the fundamentals that lead that individual to the thought of wanting to sleep in a normal day is that it would have gotten to night time. There is a particular period that we've set in the 24 hours to say that this is the time that is adequate, or this is the time that should direct to me going to sleep. There is a time when an individual directs themselves to wake up and for them to engage in their daily activities. So you will find an individual doing what is according to that particular time. So if an individual understands the time, they automatically understands what to do at that particular time. Flip side, if we look at a child that has been born and is still in their infancy, you will understand that a child can wake up at 2 a.m. and begin to cry. It is not the right thing to be doing at that particular time. And how do we know this? Because most of the times the child wakes up the parents who would be sleeping at this particular time, because the time calls for individuals to rest. But this child does not know the times. Henceforth, the child can wake up and begin to cry. So the paradox of the child crying at a time that is not convenient is simply the child failing to understand what time it is. But as the child begins to grow up, they begin to understand that at a particular time, there is something that you're not expected to be doing. That is why we see that children are given a very strict schedule, that at this particular time of the day, they should be sleeping, and at this particular time of the day, they should be awake. So when we find a generation doing the wrong thing, that generation simply does not know what time it is. So when we find someone doing something wrong, our answer to that is to make sure the individual understands what time it is. But this standard that has been set for so many years is a standard that is limited. It is limited because if you understand what time it is, it does not positively contribute in terms of your destiny and positively contribute in terms of your pursuit for purpose, which means there is a different standard that we ought to use in place of this existing standard that bases the time according to seconds, according to minutes, according to hours, and according to days. We need to find a better standard. But that particular standard should be a standard that is able to direct us in terms of purpose, to direct us in terms of destiny. Because what time is, if you go back into the time of creation, you will understand that time separates our realm from the realm of eternity, meaning to say that within eternity, they are not limited by time, but we are limited by time. And our limitation of time actually is a place and is a barricade that we are meant to pursue destiny and we are meant to pursue purpose. Which means when you're in the barricade of time, you are literally in a barricade that demands you to pursue a destiny, that demands you to pursue a purpose. A failure for you to achieve your destiny and your purpose whilst you are in the barricades of time is going to give you a different reproach or a different answer once you get into eternity. Because remember, when we go into eternity, we are well acquainted to the fact that there are going to be two kingdoms, and there are individuals within the realm of time, within the facets of time today, that everything they are doing towards their destiny, everything they are doing towards their purpose is going to contribute to where they are going to find themselves once they exit this barricade of time and they go into eternity. So it is essential for us to then have a standard that is able to then measure time, place a standard on time, so that when we say we have an understanding of times, we have an understanding of this particular standard. And having an understanding of this particular standard contributes towards the destiny and towards the purpose that we are meant to achieve. So how then do we find a standard? How then do we find a standard that we are able to place in front of time, so that whenever we say we want to understand times, we've got a standard that we can look at and henceforth follow that particular standard so that we perpetuate forward. Now let's begin to do a bit of mathematics in this particular case. So number one, when we look at time, when an individual is born, when the individual is born, what we begin to measure is something called time. That is why you see that when an individual is now 1 year old, we say that the individual is now 1 year old. What we've done there is we've broken down. We've taken seconds, the seconds from the minutes from the hours from the days from the months, and the months from the years. So what we've simply used there are the years, and these years have been derived from the smallest unit, which is a second, which is actually time. And when an individual now dies, we stop measuring time, and we now calculate the time that is passed from the time they were born to the time they died. Then we're able to equate that this individual has lived this amount of time. So that's why when an individual dies, we've got a date of birth, we've got a date of death, and if the individual lived for 66 years, we say the individual has lived for 66 years. So which means between birth and death, what is in between is a variable called time. So let's write that down and place it as variable time. Number two, when an individual is born, we say that life has started. because life starts when an individual is born into time, and life stops when an individual dies and is gone out of time. So we are able to also then safely say that when an individual is born up until they die, what they've lived in between is life. Meaning to say, from birth to death, it is equal to time. From birth to death, it is equal to life. So here we see that the two variables, even practically, time is equal to life. So henceforth, we now have a standard that we are able to measure time with, which is life. But the unfortunate thing with life is life cannot be used as a standard, because life is different in wherever you are in the world. If you're in Africa, what you consider life and what an individual in Brazil considers life will be different, because we define life based on what occurs within life. So it will be different. So henceforth, we cannot use it as a standard. We need a standard that does not change regardless of where you are. So if time is equal to life, it means that we need to find a substitute for life that will be able to then stand as a standard, and that standard can be used for us to then look at, for us to have an understanding of what time is. Now, Jesus then comes and tells us something that can help us in terms of solving this particular equation. Jesus comes and says, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. So Jesus ultimately here is saying that Jesus is equal to the way, Jesus is equal to the life. So if Jesus is equal to the life, it means that for our variable of life, we have now found something else that is able to substitute that particular variable. But we see that Jesus, no matter where you are in within the world, remains the same. He does not change. He remains the same today. He remains the same tomorrow, and he's still the same from yesterday. So now we have another equation where life is equal to Jesus. But in our previous equation, we've got time is equal to life. So we're now able to substitute life and place Jesus within that particular substitution. So now we have an understanding that time is equal to Jesus. So now we've got a standard that we can place upon time, that we can place in front of time, that remains as a standard that is able to direct us in terms of destiny, and a standard that is able to direct us in terms of purpose, which means we now have Jesus. So when we say an individual should have understanding of times, simply an individual should have an understanding of Jesus. And the understanding of Jesus then builds within that individual a direction for destiny and a direction for purpose. So it is essential for us to understand that the understanding of times means that we ought to have an understanding of the man Jesus. And remember, the continuous pursuit of the understanding of the man Jesus now correlates with what we spoke about in the previous variable, which are relationships. To say that for you to actually have an understanding of times, you also have to have an understanding of a relationship. And the relationship that comes from God is a relationship that eventually opens a channel to the relationship with Jesus. And the only way now to find yourself with the Father again means you ought to have a relationship with Jesus. So henceforth, in the ways of destiny, in the ways of purpose, an individual ought to understand Jesus. And as an individual understands Jesus, they are moving within the understanding of how they're able to contribute and how they're able to finish their destiny, and they're also able to finish our time. Let's follow this and let us continue going. So if we've said that our standard for time becomes Jesus, what then are seasons? Because seasons have to be derived from time. Now, seasons become the segmented direction that each individual is supposed to take according to their destiny and to their purpose. If we have one standard that remains the same, it ultimately means that whoever is supposed to know of times, whoever is supposed to know of Jesus, is going to know the same Jesus that will be the same wherever you go. But there has to be a segmented difference so that each individual can play a specific part of destiny and a specific part of purpose. Because remember, what destiny is, it's more of a puzzle. And when all the pieces come together, then we have a revelation of one, which is Jesus. But we ought to then know which position and which piece we are. And that then comes from seasons. So how do we understand seasons? And how are seasons coming to us? The understanding of seasons comes through what we call signals. Signals are supposed to be picked by an antenna, and that antenna is then supposed to transmit that which the signal is trying to reveal. So you will understand that there are different antennas. Henceforth, these different antennas pick up different signals. And these different signals then give different broadcasts. So as individuals, we ought to make sure that though we understand times, but we need to also pick up the signals that are specific for a path that we are supposed to take. One is going to pick a signal that they ought to be a politician and grow within politics. Yet another is going to pick up a signal that they ought to be a mother with morals and a mother with direction, because under them they are going to raise children that are going to rise to be successful businessmen. Another individual is going to pick up a signal that is completely different and maybe falls within philanthropy. It is important for you to understand your specific signal, pick that specific signal so that you also have an understanding of the season that you are in. So what is the first signal that comes towards an individual, and how do you make sure you pick up that signal so that you know what to do in the line of time according to a standard who is Jesus? The first signal that you get are what we call burdens, or what we call appetites. An appetite is the first sign that an individual is alive. So remember, when we spoke of destiny and when we spoke of time, we said when an individual gets into the barricades of time, immediately when they enter that barricade, they have become an individual that is supposed to chase destiny. So time becomes that barricade upon which individual grow within destinies and grow within purpose. So we are now saying that when you have an appetite, it means that there are certain appetites that are supposed to be transmitted in you. And those appetites and those burdens are supposed to then give you a direction in what you ought to do at that particular time. So other individuals have received appetites that they are supposed to read more. Other individuals have received appetites that they're supposed to find interest in farming. Other individuals have received appetites that they are supposed to pray. Other individuals have received appetites that they're supposed to learn from men that have been successful within business. These are appetites that an individual should never ignore, because whenever you pick up appetites, whenever you pick up burdens, you are automatically training your spirit to be discerning. When you are able to have a discerning spirit, you are able to know that which is good and that which is bad. Now, that which is bad is not primarily a sin, as most individuals think, but that which is bad is doing anything that is not seasonal at that particular time. That is why when we go to the New Testament, the Bible calls sin missing the mark, not necessarily doing what is bad. If you are expected to be a successful farmer that shall contribute within the farming of a country, and you are found as a successful pharmaceutical scientist, you are at the wrong place. You are missing the mark. You are doing what is wrong. And the Bible says, to them that know that they are supposed to be doing this and they don't do it, that then becomes sin unto them. So we ought to understand that appetites come to direct us as to what we are supposed to do at that particular season. But we ought to remember that though we may have appetites, when an individual is hungry, but they are conscious to the fact that they want to eat healthy, we need to understand that this hunger, because they are conscious to the fact that they want to be healthy, they are going to find a meal that is directly related with their consciousness of healthiness. So they find a healthy meal. But we need to remember that this particular appetite can be filled by something else that is not healthy. So which means what the enemy comes to do when an appetite or when a burden has been built in you as an individual so that you achieve destiny, the enemy simply comes and gives you what can satisfy that appetite, but that is not in line with that particular burden you're supposed to have to reach your destiny. So as an individual, if you've received an appetite that at night you ought to be studying, focusing on revivals, focusing on what great men have done in business, focusing on how men have fallen, focusing on what has been happening in politics, focusing on those trends. This is the appetite that is supposed to build you as a global leader. And as you satisfy this appetite with information in line with it, you are building yourself towards a destiny. You are building yourself towards your purpose. But what the enemy can do is the enemy can come and introduce something else that can satisfy your appetite. For example, he can come and introduce most probably some unusual love or some unusual desire to watch television. He can come and introduce an addiction. He can come and introduce anger. He can come and introduce unforgiveness, so that at that particular time you are focused on that instead of satisfying the appetite that comes from the standard, which is Jesus. What that does is it ends up satisfying your appetite for that particular time, but what you do is you miss the season altogether. Because when you're receiving burdens, they are preparing you for the destiny. So you cannot get to a destiny that you are underprepared for. You cannot get to a destiny that you are not prepared for. So what the enemy does is he introduces some external things, some external desires that will satisfy your appetite, but that will make sure that you are driven out from achieving your destiny. So here, this is when you see that the enemy is not just there to make you do the wrong things that you know religiously to the flesh, but the enemy is also there to place anything that can direct you off the appetites that are trying to give you signals for your destiny. So you ought to be very attentive. You ought to be very smart when it comes to appetites. Never neglect appetites that are linked to a standard, which is Jesus. Remember, when you have that standard, when you know that time, when you know the standard, which is Jesus, you are able to filter certain appetites to be satisfied by certain things that are not in the standard with Jesus. So the first thing is having an understanding of the standard, so that when the appetite and the burden comes, you know what to satisfy it with. Because remember, in our example, we said that if you are conscious that you want to live healthy, then when you get hungry, you satisfy your hunger with a healthy meal. But if you're not conscious to the fact that you want to live healthy, it means whenever you get hungry, you eat anything. And when you eat anything, it is dangerous, because you may eat something that will remove you, or that will remove you from your line. The second thing, or the second signal that you ought to get in terms of directing you into destiny, are encounters. Encounters come to make sure that in your limited realm, which is within time, you are able to also have an understanding of what is happening in eternity. And what is happening in eternity is going to give you direction in terms of the steps that you ought to take whilst you are in this realm of earth. So encounters matter. Encounters are important. Encounters come with you having dreams. Encounters come with you having a physical vision, or you seeing your creator and your creator directing you through specific encounters. But encounters come by grace, they come by mercy, but encounters also come by hunger. Most people that faced encounters were in seasons of hunger. Are you hungry enough to know what your destiny is? Do you have the hunger enough to know what your destiny is and to walk within your destiny? How hungry are you to pursue the mind of your creator in terms of what you ought to do? How hungry are you to pursue the roads and the channels that you're supposed to take? If you do not have hunger, forget about encounters. But remember that encounters are very essential in terms of directing you towards a specific destiny that you're supposed to have. And remember, what hunger are we talking about? We are talking of hunger that come from time, and hunger that come from the standard, which is Jesus. How hungry are you in the pursuit of Jesus, for life Jesus? For Jesus has the answer that you need for you to direct yourself within your ways. So for encounters, you need hunger. The last signal we want to talk about are cycles. Cycles are very important in understanding seasons. Remember, we've got an understanding of seasons that we have here in the physical, where we know we've got summer, we've got autumn, we've got winter, we've got spring. By study and by us having understanding, usually by people that do weather forecast or individuals that do farming, we are able to predict the month in which we're going to have winter, the months in which we're going to have summer, the months in which we're going to have autumn, the months in which we're going to have spring. And the ability for this prediction that comes from us studying elements, us studying trends, us having information towards the state of the world and the state of the climate, are able to prepare us for the coming of seasons, and so that we are doing the right thing within that particular season. So you also, as an individual, need to have information and knowledge that is able to give you the understanding of what we call cycles. Now, most of these cycles come as principles. There are certain principles that tell you that when you give, you are going to reap a reward. When you give, you are going to reap a reward. It is a seed time and harvest. It is a particular principle that remains. It is spoken of in the Bible that as long as the earth remains, these principles shall remain day and night, seed time and harvest. So there are certain things according to cycles that when one thing happens, eventually there is a predetermined result that ought to come. So as an individual, in your chase for purpose, in your chase for destiny, you obviously know that there are certain rewards that you want to get. You obviously know that there are certain returns that you ought to get. But you can start a cycle of your own, whereby you see what other individuals had to do for them to get a result. Other individuals had to give. Other individuals had to fast. Other individuals had to pray a particular time, a particular set of hours. And they receive certain results because of a cycle. Because a cycle will start, but it will always come around so that it gets to the result. So as an individual, study cycles. Study cycles that remain no matter what happens. Give if you have to give. Don't let your other hand know what your other hand is doing. Continue to give. Continue to give. Don't make a mistake that in a season where according to cycle you are supposed to be giving, you find yourself eating at that particular season. Because what you're going to do is within that particular cycle, you're going to close a particular window, and closing that particular window can have detrimental effects in terms of you achieving your destiny and in terms of you achieving your purpose. So it is henceforth essential for you to make sure you have an understanding of cycles. Cycles are signals, signals that speak of certain things that are supposed to then happen within your destiny. Everyone needs a destiny that has got resources. So if we've got a cycle that says give and you shall get resources, then it ultimately means that you can utilize that cycle so that you give a predetermined result within you so that you achieve your destiny. If you are called to pray, if you are called to serve, if you are called to do, as long as it is in line with what you ought to achieve, that ought to happen. It is very important when we talk of issues of times and seasons. There is a very small tribe as we close up in the Bible called the tribe of Issachar. This was not a tribe that was well known for its political dominance. It is not a tribe that was well known for how strong they were at war. But there is one thing we are told about this tribe that makes them peculiar. We are told that this particular tribe understood times and seasons. We will see that the understanding of times and seasons will be able to fulfill a prophecy that was upon them. Because remember, their father had blessed them. And when the father was blessing them, prophetically it was spoken upon Issachar that you are going to serve. The prophecy did say that they were going to serve, but the prophecy also spoke of how they are going to understand times and seasons. We will see that this understanding of times and seasons made them very successful farmers. They were able to get resources, they were able to get results from the ground. Though they were going to continuously serve others, but their success was also going to aid other tribes, even the tribe of Judah, where they were able to contribute even with strategies to make sure that wars would be won and how those wars could be won according to counsel. So this tribe, though it was a very small tribe and was not known to have the most powerful armies, was not known to have the most powerful kings, but this tribe was able to be successful. And this tribe was able to contribute to the success of other tribes. And according to our equation, we tell you how that is what we call impact, where your individual success is able to contribute in the success of others. Let's understand times. Let us know what you think about this episode. Ask questions if you have to. Add any information that you may feel can help us also in terms of the information and the content that we discuss in this particular episode. Because remember, no man is an epitome of knowledge, but what you know, what I know, what my brother, my sister knows, together makes the ideal knowledge that we ought to have. Until we meet again in the next episode, thank you so much and goodbye.